is going on, everybody? It is Rose, and welcome back to Cheap Lazy Vegan and another Vegan Talks video. Today I got my glass of booch, my kombucha. We're gonna be doing a little bit of talking about kind of my story of veganism and, just discussing veganism. It's one of my favorite things to do. I wanted to kind of give you guys a bit of my vegan story, although I have done this video before. Many years ago, 3 years ago, I think, specifically, right when I first started my channel. I'll link that down below if you guys want to watch it. It's about 30 minutes long, okay? But I want to give you guys a bit of context into what I believe is one of the critical reasons why I went vegan, okay? So I think my vegan journey is pretty long. It took me a long time to actually become vegan and call myself vegan. I had a bit of not like an identity crisis, but I was like not fully vegan, but also not eating meat. And like, it was just kind of like weird, that weird area, which a lot of people belong to, and that's okay. And then like a few years later, I finally was in a position where I was like, okay, I'm vegan. I went fully vegan. But my vegan journey starts way before I even stopped eating meat. It actually started with basically planting the idea in my head that what we were doing was wrong, and not necessarily our actions were wrong, but fundamentally our thoughts about how the world works and about human beings and other animals, just basically all of our ideologies were flawed in many ways. And I learned that through a class that I took in university. It was a philosophy class. So a lot of people, when they watch videos of me talking about this topic, about veganism in general, or trying to refute arguments against veganism and all that stuff, a lot of people comment and they say, I totally agree with everything you're saying, but I think that it's wrong for us to compare animal suffering to human suffering because, it turns people off. Right? Like it turns people off immediately from listening to your argument when we use words like murder and rape and all that stuff. And I totally agree. And I'm 100% big fan of strategic activism, if you will. I don't see myself as an activist, but strategic discussions, logical thinking, and trying to get people to understand your point, not by attacking or making them feel belittled or whatever it is. And I totally agree that whatever method we can use to try to get people to understand and not be turned off by our arguments, that is probably the method that we should take. But the thing is, one of the things that really helped me resonate with the arguments of veganism and animal rights was the actual comparison of human suffering to animal suffering. And I'm gonna backtrack here to university way back when. Okay, I graduated university in 2012, guys. And but this class that I took was probably in like 2009 or 2008, I can't remember. And it was a class called Contemporary Moral Issues, I believe, or that was the main focus of the class. The whole point was to discuss different ethical dilemmas, if you will, in the modern world, and discuss some controversial topics that you can link to philosophy. So some of the topics were abortion, euthanasia, all that stuff. And of course, one of the topics was animal rights. Before this, I had never discussed animal rights in any way, really, especially not in a philosophical way, but I had never debated with anyone about animal rights. Nobody challenged my beliefs. Nobody challenged the way I was living until I took this class. And I started reading literature that specifically was arguing for the protection of animals. And it was also arguing that the way that we treat animals right now is so far wrong. And it really opened my eyes, this class. And I wish I could remember all of the things that I learned specifically, but it, ties it in with different types of philosophical theories. I don't know, like Kantianism, is that how you say it? Utilitarianism and all of that stuff. The reason why I compare human suffering to animal suffering is because this is precisely the reason why I really resonated with the argument. One of the things that really resonated with me during this class was a concept called speciesism. The term essentially is similar to terms like racism or sexism, where basically a group of individuals discriminates with another group of individuals solely based on a specific characteristic such as race, gender, or species. With speciesism, essentially human beings, we are the species that discriminates against other species based on the fact and solely based on the fact that they are of that specific species and for really no other reason. And this is morally unjustifiable because the actions that we take upon those species that we discriminate against would not be justifiable in the context of human beings. So, for example, if we did something terrible to an animal, that would never be justifiable to a human, but we do so to animals and try to justify it in a moral sense. That is where I really kind of understood the argument because before this, I always thought that we were better than other animals. And I always thought that because of this, we were justified in the way that we use them. But again, I never really thought about this, to be honest. Like most people, I never actually questioned this because no one had forced me to think about this, because no one had challenged my beliefs or challenged the way that I was living. And essentially, I didn't really have beliefs, right? Because I didn't have enough information. I didn't think about this to have opinions on this topic. Do you know what I'm saying? And this is what happens when you talk to people about veganism or animal rights for the first time, because they had never really talked about this or thought about this. Maybe they thought about it a little bit, and maybe nowadays people are thinking about it more and more, but they didn't think about this that much because they had never been forced to. They live in a world where it's accepted to not think about it and to live your way of life without thinking about it. So when you bombard them with these facts or questions regarding animal rights, that's why you hear a lot of non-logical, irrational things coming out of people's mouths, even though they're not stupid people. You know what I mean? So this is so strong. Anyways, the word speciesism wasn't just thrown out there. We did study it, and we did study the arguments for and against the whole idea. Every single time you saw an argument that tried to refute speciesism or the concept of speciesism, you would see that there is a huge flaw, and just basically, you just couldn't argue it because people were trying to argue it with specific characteristics that humans have. So people were saying that humans are superior, and then they were trying to justify it with many different reasons. And all of these could be refuted. You could say humans are superior because they're more intelligent. But again, this is not a characteristic that every single human being has. And therefore, the argument is irrelevant, because unless you are willing to say that you can do whatever action to that human being that you would take on another animal and justify it by saying that that person is just not as intelligent, then you are being discriminatory, right? Because you're saying the reason is because, oh, well, animals are not as intelligent as us, and that's why we're allowed to do these things to them. But you have to admit that there are certain animals that are smarter than certain humans. So unless you're willing to admit that you would do the same thing, or the same thing would be justified to another human, the same type of treatment would be justified to another human, then you are simply discriminating between species. So the whole intelligence thing is just simply another excuse that humans use to justify discrimination. This happens all the time. Anytime there's some sort of discrimination or oppression against a certain group of individuals, they will pick out certain characteristics to justify the discrimination. But since those characteristics are not 100% universal, it's not justifiable, because you could say the same thing, maybe you can say women are this and that, but not all women are this and that. So you can't really discriminate and say, okay, well, all women should be treated this way because all women are like this, but actually all women are not like that. And some men would fall into those categories as well. So it's simply discrimination, right? It's unjustifiable is what we're saying. It's not morally or logically justifiable because none of these things are consistent. We really need to look at the facts here. The way that we can differentiate between, treating certain living beings with at least with a certain level of dignity and respect, as in not killing them or not subjecting them to torture, the way that we can really distinguish is to see whether or not they are able to suffer. And this is one of the things that I learned in the class, or one of the things that was discussed in the class. So this is all just, philosophical theories just thrown out there, and we had to discuss it and write about them. I believe I read a few things from Peter Singer. He was like the main guy that we discussed, I think. Basically, the argument was that the ability to suffer is what should be the kind of criteria for whether or not we treat somebody with respect or dignity, or, just leave them alone to live their lives. The ability to suffer could be also, translated to sentience, basically. So if you are a sentient being that is able to suffer and knows what's going on, then you deserve every right as any other human being or any other animal to live that life according to whatever you want. If somebody has the ability to suffer, and if you and I have the ability to allow them not to suffer, then it is morally unjustifiable to make them suffer. This is the one thing that just really opened my eyes, and I had a bit of a crisis during that moment, because the intellectual part of me realized the validity of this argument and realized how much it made sense compared to the alternative, which made no sense at all. It literally just sounded like people spewing out excuse after excuse to justify, a discrimination that is so deeply rooted within our society. And I think it's hard for us to swallow the fact that right now, at this moment of time, there could be something that we're doing that is unjustifiable in the broader context. So for example, in like 100 years, it's hard for us to fathom that, okay, maybe there's, a million things that we're doing right now that's morally unjustifiable, but we're doing it without even thinking and without even realizing. Like if you think back at the times like 100 years ago or 200 years ago, certain things that were accepted by society, like slavery, like sexism, racism, like extreme racism, all of those things that were accepted as normal in society because it was so deeply rooted within society and it was so normalized that those people, a lot of them, probably did not even realize the wrongdoing. You know what I mean? They didn't realize the morality of their actions or the implications, the moral implications of their actions. So I think it's very hard for us to, kind of look at ourselves and like reflect on ourselves and realize, okay, maybe we're doing something right now that isn't justifiable, but we just don't know it yet. You know what I mean? Maybe we just need more information. Maybe we need more education or whatever it may be. So that's the one thing that really opened my eyes, because up until this point, I thought I was, completely a moral person. I thought I was doing everything pretty much right. I mean, I knew I wasn't perfect, but I always like to think of myself as a good person and someone that likes animals, loves animals, essentially. So it was a hard pill for me to swallow. You know what I mean? So that happened. And then, of course, like many people, even though I kind of realized, I just went back to eating meat. I think I was vegetarian for a week. I went vegetarian for a week to try it out, but I'd never considered at that time to go vegan or vegetarian. But it stuck with me. That idea, those philosophical arguments, they stuck with me, guys. I still remember to this day. I remember nothing from university, okay? But I remember that class, and I remember it to this day because it really stuck with me. And I can almost guarantee you that if I had not taken that class, if I had not studied this literature, if I had not read about the different arguments in an academic setting like this, in an intellectual discussion and an actual intellectual respectful debate, I would not have gone vegan. I'm almost certain of it. Maybe I would have gone vegan eventually in many, many years' time, but that was the fundamental reason I went vegan. The thing is, if you don't have these fundamental ideas down, you could watch the suffering of an animal and still think that's somewhat justified because you still think, okay, I'm human, so I'm better than these animals. Therefore, I should be able to do whatever I want with these animals. Do you see what I'm saying? The point of veganism is not necessarily just to show slaughterhouse footage, which I think is important, and 100%. That is also a huge reason why I went vegan, because I watch Earthlings and all that stuff. They go hand in hand, but I do think the discussion is very important to get people to kind of understand the implications of our actions right now and what we're doing right now. And so this is why I do think it's important to compare, animal suffering to human suffering, because it's something that we can really relate to, as human beings. I think we can do it in a way that's not super offensive, and we can do it in a way that's respected and respectful by using intellectual arguments rather than attacks. So that's what really helped me, and it really resonated with me because, like I said, before all of this, before the class, I always thought human beings were better, and I always thought those people that would defend animals, I always thought, why would they defend animals when there are so many humans suffering in this world? Why do they care more about animals? That was my mindset, and I know a lot of people have that mindset. Now, after that class, I realized that mindset is flawed, because it's not necessarily that we care more about animals. It's just the fact that we see injustices, we see animals suffering, and these animals don't have a voice, right? So it's much harder. It's a much harder hill to climb, if you will. Is that the right terminology? I don't know. It's much harder because they can't fight for themselves, right? All of the other social justice movements beforehand, civil rights, abolition of slavery, all of these things had victims that could speak and could fight for themselves. So it happened probably much faster than animal rights ever will happen, because this requires basically everyone else to fight for these victims, because these victims cannot fight for themselves. It makes it a lot harder. It's a battle that is very difficult, but I think it's important. I think with the rise of the internet and education and constantly just promoting this message, we can maybe get there. Who knows what'll happen. But yeah, so, whew. Oh, I just wanted to say a little quote that I think is quite something to think about. I'm paraphrasing here, so I'll insert the actual quote here and whoever said the quote. But the quote is, "The idea that some lives are worth more than others is the root of all evil in society." I do believe that we can't get rid of all forms of discrimination without fully understanding the discrimination. And that's why I think it is still important, even though you think that people will not resonate with the message, I think it's important to fundamentally get rid of this idea that we are essentially just so much better than other animals. Because how are we going to fight this fight when we have this mindset? How are we going to treat animals with respect when we have this mindset that our lives are worth so much more than another animal's life? That is the root of all sorts of discrimination, sexism, racism, everything. It's the idea that a certain group of individuals' lives is worth more than another group of individuals simply based on one characteristic that they cannot control. And then once you have that idea, anything could be justified. It's hard for us to be like, your life is worth more than somebody else's life, especially when there is no fight to begin with, right? Essentially, when it comes to veganism, it's not a fight for, animals versus humans. It's a fight to save the planet, essentially. So it's not us against them. It's us, all of us together. And we need to realize that before it's too late. So that was my little video. I hope it made sense to you, whoever is watching. I hope that you found it somewhat helpful. If you want to watch my other videos where I discuss vegan topics, I'll leave a link to a playlist down below so you can watch that. You can also watch my videos regarding common arguments against veganism and my arguments against those arguments. And yeah, so if you want to share this video with anybody, feel free to do so. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Keep it respectful, keep it good, guys. You know what I'm saying? Respect each other. Let's not fight, okay? It's not gonna get us anywhere if we fight, you know what I'm saying? Thank you guys so much for watching, and of course, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in my next video.